When Olivia added her husband to the lease of her condo, she had no idea about his plan. But it all came to a head one evening when her elderly housekeeper approached her and said, "It's not my place, but your husband is hiding something. You need to see this for yourself." Welcome to Life's Crossroads. Before we begin, we'd love to know where you're watching from. We're always curious to hear from our community. Now, we invite you to enjoy this compelling story. Olivia saw him first. He was standing by the bar with a glass of sparkling water, talking to someone from the supply chain department. The company holiday party was loud, music thumping as colleagues crowded the dance floor, but this man stood calmly to the side, smiling as if he was perfectly content without being the center of attention. He was tall, fit, and wore a simple dark blazer over a turtleneck. He wasn't drinking, wasn't trying to command the room, yet people were drawn to him. They'd walk up, say hello, and linger for a few minutes. At the time, Olivia was a senior analyst at a major consulting firm in Chicago. She was 34 and had long ago stopped expecting anything from corporate events besides exhaustion and a morning-after headache. But that night, her colleague Chloe grabbed her by the arm. "Come on, I'm introducing you to Mark. He's in logistics, a decent guy, and single." Olivia tried to wave her off, but Chloe was already pulling her toward the bar. Mark turned out to be one of those men who truly know how to listen. He didn't interrupt, didn't steer the conversation back to himself, and he asked questions and actually remembered the answers. When Olivia mentioned she loved old Hitchcock films, he didn't pretend to be an expert. "I'm more of a documentary guy, honestly," he admitted. "But if you recommend one, I'll watch it." And he did. 3 days later, he texted her. "Watched Rear Window. Now I get why you love it. It's basically us office workers, watching the world go by." That's how their relationship began. Mark was a mid-level manager, not a director, not a business owner, just a regular, salaried employee. He rented a room in an old 2-bedroom apartment on the far north side of the city, took the L train to work, and ate in the company cafeteria. But he courted her as if he had more money than time. Flowers would appear for no reason, just because it was a Tuesday. Dinners in small, cozy restaurants where he'd reserved a table by the window in advance. On weekends, they'd drive out to a state park, hike through the woods, and drink tea from a thermos on the shore of a lake, talking for hours. Olivia wasn't used to this kind of attention. Her previous relationships had all ended the same way. The man would be charming at first, then grow distant, and eventually disappear. With Mark, everything was different. He didn't cool off. 3 months into their relationship, he showed up at her condo with a bag of groceries and cooked dinner, homemade meatballs, a fresh tomato and cucumber salad, and iced tea. He stood at her stove, wearing her apron embroidered with sunflowers, flipping meatballs with a wooden spatula. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Olivia asked, watching him from her kitchen table. "My mom taught me. She used to say, 'A man who can't even fry an egg for himself isn't a man, he's a project.' So, I tried my best not to be a project." Olivia laughed. She liked the way he spoke about his mother, with warmth and without fanfare. She liked that he wasn't embarrassed by the apron or considered cooking beneath him. She especially liked that after dinner, he washed the dishes and wiped down the counter without being asked. A year and a half later, Mark proposed. There was no diamond ring, no fancy restaurant with a string quartet. They were sitting in her kitchen one evening, drinking tea, and he just said, "Liv, let's get married. I can't imagine my life without you. And I can't imagine it without your terrible taste in coffee mugs either." She looked at him, at his serious eyes over a mug with a chipped handle, and nodded. Their wedding was modest. They signed the papers at City Hall on a Thursday morning. Olivia wore a simple cream-colored dress, and Mark was in a new suit. Their witnesses were Chloe and Mark's friend Dave, who worked as a driver for the same logistics company. Afterward, the 4 of them went to a nearby cafe for champagne and cake. Chloe made a toast. "May you never disappoint each other." At the time, it sounded like a joke. By the time they married, Olivia had owned her one-bedroom condo in a nice Lincoln Park neighborhood for 3 years. The condo had been left to her by her grandmother, Evelyn, who had lived in it for over 40 years. Olivia was her only grandchild, and Evelyn had transferred the deed to her while she was still alive, 2 years before Olivia even met Mark. 6 months after signing the papers, her grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep, in that very condo, in the room with windows overlooking a tree-lined street. Olivia had grieved deeply. Her grandmother had been both a mother since hers had moved to another country for work when Olivia was 12, and a father who had left the family even earlier. Evelyn had taken her granddaughter in and raised her in that very apartment with its high ceilings, creaky hardwood floors, and the smell of apple pie on Saturdays. Olivia remembered every crack in the plaster, every dent on the windowsill. She remembered her grandmother sitting by the window with her knitting, saying, "A place of your own isn't just walls, Livy. It's where nobody can mess with you." After her grandmother's death, Olivia had renovated the place. Not a high-end designer overhaul, but a simple, quality update. She repainted, laid down new laminate flooring over the old hardwood, and modernized the kitchen. But she kept her grandmother's china cabinet, the one with the crystal glasses used only on New Year's Eve. On the wall in the hallway, she hung a framed photo of her grandmother, a young Evelyn in a dress with a white collar, her hair styled just like Grace Kelly's, as she used to say. After the wedding, Mark moved in with Olivia. From his rented room, he brought 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of books, and a desk lamp he bizarrely considered a good luck charm, claiming it had belonged to his grandfather. Olivia cleared out half a closet, a shelf in the bathroom, and a drawer in the dresser for him. After arranging his things, Mark said, "Finally, I'm home." That, too, sounded beautiful at the time. The first few months unfolded with the unique rhythm of a couple just starting to live together. The morning collisions in the bathroom, the arguments over the bedroom temperature. Olivia liked it cool, while Mark was always cold and would close the window at night. The joint trips to the grocery store, where he would fill the cart with frozen dinners, and she would put them back, replacing them with fresh vegetables and grains. These were the small domestic battles that build a real life together. 3 months after moving in, Mark landed a new job at a large construction firm as a supply chain manager. The salary was 1.5 times his previous one, and he walked around the condo with the air of a man who had finally made it. He bought a new suit, a faux leather briefcase that looked almost real, and started leaving for work earlier than Olivia. One evening in early fall, they were having dinner. Olivia had reheated yesterday's chili and sliced some bread. Mark ate in silence, then put his spoon down and said, as if it were an afterthought, "Liv, there's something. At work, they told me that for a management position, I need a permanent, verifiable address on file. They can't clear me through the security background check without it. It's some internal company policy. They verify your place of residence. It's a big deal. Could you add me to the official residency documents for the condo?" Olivia looked up at him, her spoon hovering mid-air. "Add you? You mean, like, officially?" "Yeah, it's just a formality. We're married. We live together. What's the difference if I'm on the paperwork or not?" Olivia paused. It wasn't that she had doubts, more that she hadn't expected the request. The condo was hers, that was clear. But Mark was her husband. They lived under the same roof, shared a bed and a refrigerator. To say no would be a sign of distrust. And she trusted him. "Okay," she said. "We can go to a notary next week." Mark smiled, got up from the table, and kissed the top of her head. "Thanks, Liv. I knew you'd understand." A week later, it was done. Mark was officially listed as a resident at her address. She signed an affidavit of residency, filled out a form, and had it notarized. Mark waited in the lobby, scrolling through his phone. When they left, he said, "Well, now I'm an official resident of this building." Olivia smiled and replied, "You already were. Now there's just a piece of paper that says so." A piece of paper. At the time, it really seemed like just a piece of paper. Olivia's job was the kind that didn't end at 5 p.m. The consulting firm she worked for had major clients, banks, insurance companies, industrial conglomerates, reports, presentations, strategic overviews. It all required hours of focused work, often stretching into the evenings and weekends. Olivia would stay at the office until 8 or 9 p.m., and sometimes went on business trips for 2 or 3 days to client sites or conferences. The household suffered. The sink would fill with dishes by Wednesday, and dust would gather on the shelves. A basket of clean laundry would sit, unironed, for days. Olivia would come home exhausted, open the fridge to find it empty, and order takeout. Mark wasn't quick to help around the house after moving in. His culinary enthusiasm had somehow faded. Now he cited his busy schedule, new position, new responsibilities. "My head is full of numbers and contracts," he'd say. Olivia didn't push. She didn't want to become the wife who nagged her husband over an unwashed plate. One day during lunch at the office, she complained to her colleague Chloe, the same one who had introduced her to Mark. "I get home, and it looks like a disaster zone. I have no time to cook, no time to clean. And Mark won't lift a finger." Chloe took a sip of her coffee. "Hire a housekeeper. A real one, not some kid from an app who'll spend half the day on their phone. A woman with experience. I have someone, Eleanor Vance. She's 62. She's been working for a few families for over 15 years. Quiet, honest, and an amazing cook. My husband literally asks, 'When is Mrs. Vance coming back?'" Olivia took the number and called that evening. A woman with a low, calm voice answered. They agreed to meet on Saturday morning. Eleanor Vance arrived at 10 a.m. sharp. Olivia glanced out the window and saw a short woman in a gray coat entering the building. She opened the door. Eleanor was neat, with short, gray hair swept back. Her face was serene, with fine lines around her eyes, the kind of face that has seen a lot but has learned not to show it. She was dressed simply, a clean blouse, a dark skirt, and comfortable flat shoes. She entered, removed her shoes at the door, and looked around. Olivia noticed her gaze quickly scan the entryway, the coat rack, the shoe shelf, the mirror. It wasn't a judgmental look, but a professional one, of someone accustomed to creating order and instantly seeing where it was lacking. "Come into the kitchen," Olivia said. "Would you like some tea?" "Thank you, I'd love some." They sat at the table. Olivia put the kettle on and got out some mugs. Eleanor sat with a straight back, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't fidgety or overly friendly. She spoke little but listened intently. When Olivia explained that she needed help with cleaning, cooking, and ironing, Eleanor nodded and asked only one thing. "What days would be convenient for you? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. From 10 to 6 if that works for you." "That works." They agreed on a wage. Olivia named a figure, and Eleanor didn't haggle. Olivia gave her a spare set of keys, showed her the condo, and explained where everything was. Eleanor walked through the rooms, glanced inside the kitchen cabinets, opened the refrigerator, and nodded. In the bedroom, she paused for a moment by the framed photograph on the wall. "Your grandmother?" she asked. "Yes, Evelyn." This was her condo. Eleanor looked at the photo for another moment, then turned away. "A beautiful woman. You can tell she had character," Olivia smiled. Character is putting it mildly. Starting that Monday, Eleanor began working. She would arrive at 10, after Olivia had already left for the office. She went about her duties, quietly mopping the floors, dusting, ironing clothes, and preparing lunch and dinner. By the evening, the condo smelled of cleanliness and home-cooked food. Olivia would return, open the door, and feel, for the first time in a long while, that she was coming home, not just to a space where she slept. Mark was nonchalant about the housekeeper's presence. He'd say hello, sometimes exchange a few words, but mostly ignored Eleanor. When he worked from home, he'd stay in the bedroom with his laptop and only come out for coffee. Eleanor, in turn, kept to herself, did her job, and left. Two people in the same space, each minding their own business. The first 2 months went smoothly. The condo was immaculate. The refrigerator always had containers of prepared meals. Mark's shirts hung pressed in the closet. The towels in the bathroom were changed every 3 days. Olivia breathed a sigh of relief. It felt like life had finally settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, home, husband, a reliable helper. Everything was in its place, just as it should be. She didn't yet know that it only seemed right. The first warning sign was the evenings. Mark used to come home by 7. Olivia could predict almost to the minute when the lock would click and his voice would echo from the hall. "Liv, I'm home!" Then 7 became 8, then 9. Then he started arriving after 10. One night, as Olivia was already in bed with a book, he stumbled in at 11:30, smelling of cigarette smoke and someone else's perfume. Though at the time, Olivia decided she must have imagined the perfume. The smoke, yes, Mark sometimes had a cigarette with colleagues after work, but the perfume? Probably just someone heavily scented in the elevator. "Why are you so late?" she asked, not looking up from her book, though the words were already blurring. "Project's on fire," he answered from the bathroom, turning on the water. "Procurement for the next quarter. The vendors are dragging their feet, and the director's on edge. You know how it is." Olivia did know. She worked in the same high-pressure environment when deadlines loomed. So she nodded and went back to her book. Mark got into bed, turned his back to her, and was breathing evenly within a minute. Olivia lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Something was wrong, but she couldn't articulate what it was. It felt like a faint draft from a crack you can't see but can feel on your skin. Then came the phone. He'd always had a phone, of course, but before, he treated it casually, tossing it on the table, leaving it on the windowsill, forgetting it in his jacket pocket. Now, the phone was always with him, like an extra appendage, to the bathroom with the phone, to the kitchen for water with the phone. Even when he went to take out the trash, he'd slide it into his back pocket. And one more detail. He started placing it screen down. Always. On the table, on the nightstand, on the kitchen counter, screen down, as if it might accidentally display something it shouldn't. One morning, Olivia was getting ready for work. Mark was in the shower. His phone was on the kitchen table, screen down as usual. Olivia's own phone was dead, so she instinctively picked his up to check the time. The screen lit up, displaying a text notification. The name was M, and the message began, "Tonight's not going to whir." The rest was cut off. Before Olivia could process it, she heard quick footsteps from the bathroom. Mark appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in a towel, his hair wet. "That's my phone," he said, taking it from her hand. Not rudely, but quickly. Too quickly. "I was just checking the time," Olivia replied. "Mine died. It's got work chats on it. Please don't touch it. We have confidential discussions with suppliers." He said it in an even tone, looking her in the eyes. Then he smiled, kissed her on the cheek, and went to get dressed. Olivia stood by the table, a cup of cold coffee in her hand, thinking, who is M? Manager? Michael? Megan? She shook her head. She wouldn't become one of those women who check their husband's phone and interrogate him over every single letter. She had enough on her plate. A week later, there was the incident with the documents. It was a Sunday evening. Olivia came back from the grocery store, put the food away, and went to the bedroom to change. Mark was standing by the dresser. The top drawer was open, and he was sifting through the contents of a file folder, the very folder where she kept the deed to the condo, the title insurance, donation papers from her grandmother, and other important documents. The folder was dark blue with worn corners. Olivia had kept everything important in it since her grandmother's time. "What are you looking for?" she asked from the doorway. Mark turned around. Not a hint of surprise on his face. Calm eyes, a slight smile. "My health insurance card. I have a dentist appointment tomorrow and forgot where I put it. Thought I stuck it in here. It should be in the side pocket on the right." Mark rummaged in the folder and pulled out the card. Ah, right. Here it is. Thanks. He closed the drawer and left the room. Olivia looked at the dresser. Everything seemed normal. The insurance card really was in that folder. But a small, sharp feeling pricked at her, like a splinter under a nail. She opened the drawer and checked the folder. Everything was there. The deed, the title papers, the gift affidavit. But the order was wrong. Olivia always arranged the documents in a specific way. Deed on top, then title insurance, then the gift affidavit, then everything else. Now, the insurance papers were on top of the deed, and the gift affidavit was at the very bottom. Maybe she had moved them herself last time and forgotten? Possibly. Olivia closed the drawer and went to the kitchen to make pasta. Meanwhile, in that same condo, amidst the familiar routine of dusting cloths and saucepans, a different set of observations was quietly accumulating. Eleanor Vance noticed more than a housekeeper was supposed to. The housekeeper came 4 times a week, and in 2 months, she had learned the condo better than its owners. She knew which floorboard creaked by the bedroom door. She knew the kitchen faucet would drip if you turned it all the way off, instead of just 3/4 of the way. She knew Olivia kept her jewelry in a wooden box with a carved lid on her vanity. 2 gold rings, a chain with a pendant, turquoise teardrop earrings, and a dragonfly-shaped brooch that had belonged to her grandmother. Eleanor dusted that box every Friday and knew its contents by heart. She also noticed a pattern in Mark's behavior. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Olivia left for work early, around 8 a.m., sometimes sooner. On those days, Mark stayed home, claiming he was working remotely. Eleanor would arrive at 10 and find him in the bedroom with his laptop, but around 11, he would come into the kitchen and say the same thing, almost word for word. "Eleanor, I have a major conference call in half an hour. I'm going to need complete quiet, no vacuuming or anything. Maybe you could finish up a little early today? I'll take care of the rest myself later." The first time, she thought nothing of it. The second, she figured he had a lot of important meetings. The third time, she noticed he had put on a fresh shirt and cologne for a conference call. The fourth time, she left without a word, but she lingered in the hallway, pretending to tie a shoelace that didn't need tying. She heard a click from behind the door. Mark had engaged the chain lock. That was odd. Eleanor always locked the door with the key when she left. Why would he need the chain? But the decisive moment came the following Thursday. Mark again asked her to leave early. Eleanor gathered her things, put on her coat, picked up her bag, and left. She walked to her bus stop and then slapped her forehead. Her umbrella. It had been raining that morning, and she had placed her folding umbrella in the stand by the front door and forgotten it. It was a good, sturdy umbrella with a wooden handle, a gift from her daughter for her birthday. She didn't want to leave it behind. Eleanor stood for a moment, thought, sighed, and walked back. At least 15 minutes had passed. She went up to the floor and turned her key in the lock. The door wouldn't open. The chain. Eleanor rang the doorbell. Silence. She rang it again, holding it down longer. From inside, she heard a shuffling sound. Footsteps, then Mark's voice. "Who is it?" "It's me, Eleanor. I forgot my umbrella." A pause. Hurried, flustered footsteps, not toward the door but deeper into the apartment. Then, footsteps back to the door. The chain rattled. The door opened a crack. Mark stood in the opening, his face irritated and slightly flushed. "I must have dozed off," he said. "What did you need?" "My umbrella. It's in the stand by the door." He glanced down, grabbed the umbrella, and handed it to her. He had opened the door just wide enough to pass it through, but Eleanor had already seen what she wasn't supposed to see. On the floor in the entryway, to the right of the shoe rack, sat a pair of shoes. Women's shoes. Beige, patent leather pumps with a low heel. A small size a 6, maybe a 7 at most. Olivia wore a size 10. Eleanor knew this for a fact. She arranged the owner's shoes on the rack herself and had held Olivia's shoes and boots in her hands many times. "Thank you," Eleanor said, taking the umbrella. Mark grunted and shut the door. The chain clicked back into place. Eleanor walked down the stairs slowly, holding the railing. A single thought pounded in her head. Those shoes. Beige pumps, a small size, in an apartment where a woman with size 10 feet lived. It wasn't a mistake. She hadn't imagined it. They were a stranger's shoes, a strange woman's shoes in someone else's condo on a workday when the owner wasn't home. She went outside and opened her umbrella, though the rain had stopped, and walked to the bus stop. The entire ride home, she was silent, staring out the window of the bus. At home, she made herself some tea, sat at her small, cramped kitchen table, nothing like Olivia's spacious one, and stayed there until evening. A week later, on a Friday, Eleanor was cleaning the entryway, wiping down the console table by the mirror, the one where Olivia left her keys, gloves, and other small items. She moved a set of keys, a dish with loose change, a hairbrush, and saw an earring, a tiny gold stud with a small, clear stone. It was lying against the wall, almost invisible on the dark wood. Eleanor picked it up with 2 fingers and held it to the light. The backing was tight. This wasn't an old or long-lost earring. Someone had taken it off recently and forgotten it. Eleanor knew the contents of Olivia's jewelry box by heart. There were no gold studs with stones in it. Olivia didn't even own stud earrings. She wore teardrops or small hoops because she liked the way they moved. This earring belonged to someone else, the same woman who wore beige size 7 shoes. Eleanor placed the earring back on the shelf, near the wall where it had been. She finished her cleaning, mopped the floors, and prepared braised chicken and vegetables for dinner. She left the pot on the stove and left. All the way home, she thought. Should I say something? Or stay quiet? She worked for this family, got paid for cleaning and cooking, not for spying on other people's husbands. Maybe there was an explanation. A friend of Mark's? A relative? Maybe Olivia knew and didn't mind. People have all sorts of arrangements. But her gut told her otherwise. Eleanor had raised 2 daughters, gone through a divorce, and buried her second husband, a good man who died of a heart attack at 53. She knew the smell of deceit. It wasn't a perfume. It was this frantic energy, these hurried steps into the apartment, this chain on the door, this irritated I must have dozed off. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place 3 days later. On Wednesday evening, Olivia was running late at work. She called to say she'd be home by 9. Eleanor was finishing up, cleaning the kitchen, wiping down the countertops. It was around 7. The condo smelled of cleaning supplies and the pot roast that was simmering in the oven for dinner. The front door clicked open. Mark was home earlier than usual, apparently not expecting the housekeeper to still be there. He walked into the kitchen, dropped his keys on the counter, and, without a glance at Eleanor, went to the fridge for a bottle of water. He took a swig directly from the bottle, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and went to the bedroom. He didn't even say hello. Eleanor continued wiping the counter. Her cloth moved across the granite, reaching the set of keys. She instinctively slid them aside and suddenly froze. One of the keys, the one to the front door, she recognized its shape was lying face up. On its base, near the head, was a deep, straight groove, clean and precise. About 1.5 millimeters deep. It wasn't a scratch from a keyring, not a mark from daily use. It was too neat, too straight. Eleanor picked up the key and turned it toward the light. Her hands remembered before her mind caught up. For 30 years, she had worked at the Ace Hardware on the corner of Clark and Fullerton. For the last 15 of those years, she was the one who stood behind the counter and operated the machine. Key duplication, knife sharpening, lock repairs, it all passed through her hands. She had cut thousands of copies for apartment doors, garages, mailboxes, safes, and she knew every mark a duplicating machine leaves. This groove was the characteristic imprint of the vise. When you make a duplicate, the original key is clamped at its base to hold it steady in the copying machine's jig. The vise leaves exactly that kind of mark, a straight crosswise groove near the head of the key. You never get damage like that from normal use in a pocket, on a key ring, in a lock. Never. Eleanor placed the key back on the counter. Her hands weren't shaking. She wasn't the type whose hands shake. But inside, something shifted. As if the final piece of a puzzle she never wanted to see had clicked into place, and the full picture became terrifyingly clear. The shoes, the earring, the requests to leave early, the chain on the door, the cologne for a conference call, and now, a duplicate key. A key to a condo that belonged to Olivia, not Mark Olivia. Why would a husband make a secret copy of the key to his own home? He had his own key. A spare set was in a drawer in the entryway. Eleanor had seen it while dusting. If he had lost or broken his key, he could have just asked his wife for the spare, but he hadn't asked. He had made a copy himself, secretly, a copy that could be given to someone else. Someone who wears beige size 7 shoes and gold stud earrings. Eleanor quickly finished her work. She rinsed the cloth, hung it on its hook, checked the oven and lowered the temperature. Took off her apron, folded it into the cabinet under the sink, put on her coat, and left. Mark never emerged from the bedroom. He didn't say goodbye, didn't check if she was gone. The door closed behind her with a soft click. It was dark outside. Streetlights cast a yellow glow on the wet leaves scattered across the sidewalk from an afternoon rain. Eleanor walked her usual route to the bus stop, past the pharmacy, the grocery store, the playground that was always empty in the evenings. She sat on the bench at the bus stop and took her phone out of her bag, not to call anyone, but just to keep her hands busy. She stared at the dark screen and thought, each detail, on its own, could have an explanation. The shoes a friend dropped by. The earring, someone lost it by accident. The request to leave a genuine meeting. The key, well, maybe he needed it for a locksmith at work. Who knows? But together, they formed a story that Eleanor read not with her eyes, but with the intuition that comes from decades of living alongside people. She had cleaned in other people's homes for 15 years. She had seen a lot. She'd seen families fall apart before her eyes, and families that held on against all odds. She'd seen husbands who lied to their wives, and wives who chose to look the other way. She had learned not to interfere. That was the #1 rule for a housekeeper. You are invisible. You wash the floors, cook the food, iron the shirts. You see nothing, hear nothing, and have no opinion. But Olivia wasn't just another client. Eleanor saw how she came home in the evening, tired, and sat in the kitchen to eat the dinner prepared for her, smiling with a quiet gratitude. Like someone who appreciates simple care. She saw how Olivia would gently touch the frame of her grandmother's photo as she passed it in the hall. She saw how she folded Mark's clothes neatly, in a stack, smoothing out every shirt. This was a woman who trusted, and that trust was being exploited. The bus arrived. Eleanor got up, put her phone in her bag, and stepped aboard. The whole way home, she stared out the window in silence. At home, she put the kettle on, sat at her small kitchen table, and poured tea into a mug that said "World's Best Grandma," a gift from her grandson. She sat like that until 11 p.m. The tea grew cold. She poured a new cup. It got cold too. By midnight, her decision was made. She couldn't stay silent. She had no right, not to Olivia as her employer, but to Olivia as a woman, living in her grandmother's home, completely unaware that her husband was bringing another woman there and making secret copies of the keys. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe Olivia would get angry and fire her. Maybe she'd say, "It's none of your business, Eleanor. Stick to the cleaning." And she would be within her rights, but if she stayed silent. And it later turned out that everything was true. Eleanor wouldn't be able to look at herself in the mirror. She just couldn't. She washed her mug, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. Tomorrow morning, she would speak. The morning was overcast. A gray sky hung outside the window, and the condo felt dim even with the lights on. Eleanor arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, took off her coat, changed her shoes, tied her apron, and peeked into the kitchen, slightly surprised. Olivia was home. Usually, she was long gone by this time. But today, she was sitting at the table in her loungewear, drinking coffee and scrolling through her phone. Perhaps a morning meeting was canceled, or she was taking a half day to work remotely. Eleanor didn't ask. "Good morning, Olivia." Olivia nodded without looking up from her screen. Eleanor started in the bathroom, wiped the mirror, cleaned the sink, changed the towels. Then she moved to the bedroom, made the bed, and dusted. Her hands performed their familiar tasks while her mind worked separately. How to start the conversation? Should she be direct? "Your husband is bringing another woman here." Or gentler, "I've noticed something you should know." She went to the kitchen twice, once for cleaning supplies, once to rinse a cloth. Both times, Olivia was at the table. Both times, Eleanor opened her mouth to speak and then closed it. The third time, she heard Olivia get up, walk to the entryway, and rustle her coat. She was leaving. Now or never. The moment would be lost. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and walked into the hall. Olivia was standing by the mirror, buttoning her coat, about to leave. "Olivia," Eleanor said quietly. Olivia turned around. "Yes, this is not my business, and you can tell me to stay out of it. But your husband is hiding something. Last night, he tossed his keys on the kitchen counter, and I was wiping it down. I saw a deep groove on the key to the front door right here, near the head." Eleanor pointed to the spot on her own key. "I worked at a key-cutting counter for 30 years. Those marks are left when the original key is clamped in the vise of a duplicating machine. Your husband made a copy of your condo key. Maybe it's for something innocent. But I thought you should know." Olivia stood with her hand frozen on a button, silent for a few seconds. "Maybe he lost his and made a spare?" she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps. But the spare set is in the drawer in the hall. He could have just asked you." Eleanor paused, then added, looking at the floor, "There's something else. I didn't say anything before because I wasn't sure, but twice, when you weren't home, I saw unfamiliar shoes by the door. Women's shoes, beige, a small size. And last week, on the console table, I found an earring, a small gold stud with a stone. It wasn't yours." Olivia just stood there. Her coat was buttoned, her bag on her shoulder, but she didn't move. After a few moments of silence, she said softly, "Thank you, Eleanor. I'll handle it." She put on her hat and walked out the door. In the elevator, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. The entire drive to the office, she was silent, the radio off. Her mind wasn't processing thoughts, just fragments. Spinning in a loop. Beige shoes, earring, key, phone screen down, documents out of order, M in a text message. I dozed off, the chain on the door. Each piece alone was a trifle. Together, they were a verdict. She spent the day at work but accomplished almost nothing. She opened files, stared at spreadsheets, then closed them. She drank cup after cup of coffee until she felt sick. Her friend Chloe popped in after lunch. "Are you okay? You look pale." "Just a headache," Olivia replied. Chloe brought her an aspirin and left. That evening, Olivia went home. Mark was on the sofa, watching something on a tablet. He looked up. "Hey, how was your day?" "Fine," she answered. She went to the kitchen, ate a plate of the pot roast Eleanor had left, and went to the bathroom. She stood under the shower and thought. She didn't cry. She thought. For the next 3 days, she observed. Silently, calmly, as if analyzing data at work. She checked the folder with the documents, everything was there, but the papers were out of order again. The deed, the title insurance, the gift affidavit. Mark could have photographed every page in 5 minutes. She checked her printer history. It was empty, but that meant nothing. She checked her email for any requests for property records or statements. Nothing. But a lack of evidence was also evidence. A person with nothing to hide doesn't bother to erase their tracks. On Friday evening at dinner, Olivia said, spreading butter on a piece of bread, "I'm going on a business trip next week. Tuesday and Wednesday. I'll be back Thursday around noon." Mark nodded, not looking up from his phone. "Where to?" "Denver office. Quarterly report. Audit. Got it. Bring me back some of that craft beer like last time. I will. Olivia watched his face. Not a hint of concern, or joy, or agitation. Just the flat, calm reaction of a man who sees nothing unusual in his wife's business trip or sees a convenient opportunity. On Tuesday morning, Olivia packed an overnight bag, kissed Mark goodbye, and left the condo. She got in her car, pulled out of the parking garage, and drove not to the airport, but to her friend Sarah's apartment, a 20-minute drive away. She had called Eleanor the day before and asked her not to come in, saying Mark would be working from home and needed quiet. She stayed at Sarah's until 2 o'clock, drinking tea and pacing restlessly. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. "I'll tell you later," Olivia replied. "At 2, she said, "I have to go," and drove home. She parked around the block, where her car wouldn't be visible from the building. She entered through a side entrance, took the stairs up to her floor, and stopped at her door, listening. Voices, a man's and a woman's. The man was Mark. She'd recognize his intonation anywhere. The woman's voice was unfamiliar, young, slightly muffled, not whispering, just the normal conversation of people who are certain no one can hear them. Olivia took out her key, inserted it into the lock, and turned. The door opened. The chain wasn't on. Mark wasn't expecting her. She stepped into the entryway. By the shoe rack stood the very same shoes, beige pumps with a low heel, a small size. Next to them were Mark's boots. On the coat rack hung his jacket and a light-colored woman's coat, the color of dusty rose. Olivia took off her shoes and walked into the living room. Mark was standing by the window, half turned to the room. Next to him was a woman short, with dark, shoulder-length hair, around 30. Mark was saying something to her, gesturing with his hand toward the wall, then the window, then the bedroom door, like a real estate agent showing a buyer the condo's best features. He saw Olivia first. The hand he was pointing with froze in midair. His face went white, his jaw twitched, but he quickly composed himself. "Liv, I thought you were in Denver." This is my colleague. We were just discussing a project." But the woman didn't grasp what was happening. She turned to Olivia with a friendly, unsuspecting smile and said, "Mark, you said the condo would be free. When can I start moving my things in?" Her words fell into the silent room like stones down a well. Olivia looked at the woman, at her plain face, at the smile that was slowly fading. And then she noticed her belly, a round, distinct belly under a loose sweater. 5, maybe 6 months pregnant. "Who are you?" Olivia asked. Her voice was steadier than she expected. The woman looked from Olivia to Mark. He was silent. The smile vanished completely from her face. "I'm Megan," she said quietly. "Mark said we would move in here after he got everything sorted out. He said this was his condo." "His condo?" Olivia repeated. Not a question, but a statement, as if she were tasting the words and finding them bitter. "This condo belonged to my grandmother. It was gifted to me 2 years before I even met Mark. He knows that perfectly well." Mark took a step forward, his hands raised in the gesture of a man trying to put out a fire with his bare palms. "Liv, you're getting this all wrong. Megan is just an acquaintance. She has nowhere to live. I was just trying to help her out temporarily. The baby's not mine. She's just not yours." Megan's voice broke. She grabbed the back of a chair for support. "Mark, you've been telling me for 6 months that you were getting a divorce. You promised we would live together." "What do you mean, not yours?" She stared at him, and the look in her eyes made Olivia's stomach turn. It wasn't anger. It was pure confusion. The confusion of someone who has just realized they're not standing on solid ground, but on thin ice that is cracking beneath them. "Get out," Olivia said. "Both of you." Megan grabbed her coat from the rack, put on her beige shoes, and left without a backward glance. Olivia heard her sob once in the hallway. Then the heavy front door of the building slammed shut. Mark didn't move. "Liv, let's talk about this. You have to understand. It's not what you think. I think exactly what I see. You brought a pregnant woman into my home and were showing her where to move her things. The only talking we'll be doing is through our lawyers. Lawyers? What are you talking about? We're a family. Family, Olivia repeated. Leave, Mark. Get what you need and get out. Leave your key on the table. He stood there for another minute, then went to the bedroom, threw some things into a bag, came back, placed his key on the kitchen counter, and walked out. The door clicked shut. Olivia sank onto a stool. The kitchen was clean, smelling of glass cleaner and a faint trace of someone else's perfume. The key lay on the counter. She picked it up and turned it to the light. The groove near the head. Everything correct. Everything in its place. She sat like that for 20 minutes, not moving. Then she stood up, poured a glass of water, drank it in one gulp, and began to think. Not to feel, but to think. The way she was trained to do at work, breaking down a problem into its component parts. The condo was hers, acquired before the marriage through a deed of gift. It was not marital property, that was a fact. But Mark was an official resident at this address. She had signed the papers herself. He had made a duplicate key and given it to Megan. Megan was pregnant. If Olivia hadn't come back, Megan would have moved her things in. Mark would have registered the child at his legal address here. A minor registered in a property is a lock you can't pick. Evicting a child without providing equivalent housing is nearly impossible. Child Protective Services would block it. And where the child is, the mother has a right to be. And where the mother and child are, the father has grounds to demand access. Olivia put the key down and picked up her phone. She looked up the number for a 2-4-hour locksmith and called for a technician to come today. The locksmith, an older man in a work jacket carrying a toolbox, arrived 2 hours later. Olivia opened the door and showed him the locks. There were two, the main deadbolt and a top lock. The locksmith examined both and whistled. You want 'em both changed? Both. It's a situation. He didn't ask questions. He worked in focused silence, removing the old cylinders, fitting the new ones, testing the key's action, and lubricating the mechanisms. 40 minutes later, he handed Olivia 3 sets of new keys, shiny and without a single scratch. Well, nobody's made a copy of these yet, he said, probably not realizing how precisely he had hit the mark. Olivia paid him, closed the door behind him, and threw the new deadbolt. The sound was different, clean, solid, with no give. She turned the key a second time and leaned her back against the door. The condo was silent. Her grandmother's photo on the wall looked down at her from behind the glass. The young Evelyn with her Grace Kelly hair. Olivia walked over, straightened the frame, and said aloud, I won't let them take it, Grandma. Don't you worry. The next morning, she took a personal day and went to see a lawyer. The firm was recommended by Chloe, the same font of wisdom who had once introduced her to Mark and Eleanor. The lawyer was a lean man in his 50s, with thin-rimmed glasses. He listened without interrupting as Olivia laid out the entire story. The inheritance, the wedding, the residency papers, the housekeeper, the key, Megan, the pregnancy. The lawyer took off his glasses, polished them with a cloth, and put them back on. The condo is your premarital property. The deed of gift was executed 2 years before your marriage was registered. By law, your husband has no ownership claim to it whatsoever. Listing him as a resident grants him right of occupancy, not ownership, but he is a resident. Can he sue for the right to live there? He can try. But upon divorce, the court will terminate a former spouse's residency if the owner objects. The condo is yours, the marriage is over, and there are no grounds for him to continue living there. And if he had managed to register the child there? The lawyer paused, choosing his words carefully. Then the situation would have been significantly more complex. A minor child registered at an address is a serious legal shield. Evicting a child without providing alternative housing is practically impossible. The family court and social services would side with the child. And with the child would come the right of his mother to reside there as his caregiver. In effect, You would have lost control of your own home without losing the title. You'd either be living in your condo with a strange woman and her child, or not living there at all. Olivia clasped her hands in her lap. What do I do? File for divorce and simultaneously petition to have him removed as a legal resident. I'll prepare the paperwork. Given your circumstances, the court will side with you. There's no doubt. Olivia signed the retainer agreement that day. When she returned home that evening, she cooked dinner for herself for the first time in a long time. Not because Eleanor hadn't left food she had, but because she needed to keep her hands busy. She chopped vegetables, stirred soup, and watched the steam rise from the pot. The condo was quiet and clean. For the first time in months, it was hers alone. Mark started calling the next day. At first, his tone was conciliatory. He sent long text messages explaining that Olivia had misunderstood everything, that Megan was a casual acquaintance, that the baby wasn't his, that he was willing to prove it. Olivia didn't reply. After 3 days, his tone shifted. The calls became more frequent. His voice and messages grew harder. You have no right to change the locks. I am a legal resident of that apartment. By law, it's my home too. I will see you in court. I have residency. And you can't just throw me out on the street. You'll regret this, Olivia. I'm not just going to walk away. Olivia forwarded every message to her lawyer, who read them, shook his head, and said, Let him write. This will all go into the file. He has no legal grounds for his position, only emotion and bluster. A week later, Mark tried to come to the condo. Olivia was home and heard a key turn in the lock, failing to open it. Then, the doorbell rang. She went to the door and looked through the peephole. Mark was standing in the hallway with a duffel bag over his shoulder, his face red and angry. Open the door, Olivia. I live here. Not anymore, she replied through the door. And my lawyer confirmed it. Residency does not equal ownership. We'll settle this in court. Court? Are you serious? Over what? You know what over? Go away, Mark. He stood there for another minute, then slammed his fist against the door, not hard, more out of impotence, and left. Olivia heard his footsteps retreat down the stairs. Then the slam of the building's main door. She stepped away from her own door and sat on the small bench in the entryway. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the tension she had been holding inside for days. The court hearing took place 2 months later. The lawyer had prepared everything flawlessly. The deed of gift proving premarital acquisition of the property, the marriage certificate with a date subsequent to the gift, and the petition to terminate residency. Mark showed up with his own lawyer, a young guy in a wrinkled suit who tried to argue that residency granted a right to habitation, that his client had contributed to the condo's upkeep and maintenance, and that evicting him violated his constitutional rights. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a tired but sharp gaze, listened to both sides, then asked Mark one question. Did you contribute any funds toward the acquisition of this property? No. But did you pay for significant renovations out of your own pocket? I paid for utilities. The property was acquired by the plaintiff via a deed of gift prior to the marriage. Paying utility bills does not create an ownership interest, nor does it constitute grounds for maintaining residency after the dissolution of the marriage. The ruling was brief and unequivocal. The marriage was dissolved. Mark was to be removed as a legal resident from the property address. Effective within 30 days, Mark walked out of the courtroom without looking at Olivia. His lawyer trailed behind him, muttering something, but Mark wasn't listening. Olivia stood in the courthouse hallway, clutching the folder with the judgment, the same dark blue folder with the worn corners, which now held one more important document. A month later, Mark was officially removed. A stamp on a document, a line in a database, and that was it. The man who had walked into her condo a year and a half ago with 2 suitcases and a desk lamp no longer had any connection to it. Olivia heard about Megan by chance, through mutual acquaintances. She had broken up with Mark almost immediately after that day in the condo. Upon learning that he didn't own the property and never had, that he had been lying from the beginning about the divorce, the condo, and their future life together, she packed her things and moved back to her parents' home in another state. Olivia felt no anger toward her. She felt sorry for Megan, who had also been deceived, just from the other side of the same lie. A week after receiving the final court order, Olivia called Eleanor and invited her over on Saturday not to work, but as a guest. "Eleanor, could you come by around 2? I bought a cake." "A cake? What's the occasion?" "A good one. Come over, and I'll tell you everything." Eleanor arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, as always, but not in her work apron. She wore a nice blouse with a small floral print, something she clearly didn't wear often. Olivia opened the door and, for the first time, gave her a hug, brief and wordless. On the kitchen table sat a honey cake, the kind Eleanor had once mentioned she loved as a child. A teapot, mugs, and sliced lemon were next to it. The late autumn sun was shining, filling the kitchen with a soft, warm light. They sat at the table. Olivia cut the cake and poured the tea. For a few minutes, they ate in a comfortable silence, the kind between people who don't need to fill the space with words. Then Olivia put down her mug and said, "Eleanor, if it weren't for you, I would have found out about all this when it was too late. He would have moved that woman in, registered the baby here, and I would have spent years in court trying to get my own home back. You didn't just notice a scratch on a key. You found the courage to tell me the truth, when it would have been easier to stay silent." Eleanor held her mug with both hands, warming her palms on the porcelain. "I thought about it for a long time. I didn't sleep all night. I was afraid you'd be angry with me, or think I was meddling." "You were meddling in what was absolutely my business," Olivia said with a smile. "And I'm more grateful to you than I can ever say." Eleanor shook her head. "I looked at keys for 30 years. Dozens of keys. Every single day. My hands remember what my eyes might overlook. When I saw that groove, I just couldn't keep quiet. Not because I'm special, but because you're a good woman, Olivia, and this condo was from your grandmother. You don't let people who don't deserve them take things like that." Olivia felt a prickle in her nose and quickly took a sip of tea to hide it. Outside the window, the wind rustled the branches of an old maple tree, the same one her grandmother Evelyn used to watch while sitting by the window with her knitting. Eleanor continued to work for Olivia. She came, as before, 4 times a week to clean, cook, and iron. But something had changed. A quiet, unobtrusive closeness had formed between them, the kind that develops between people who have gone through something difficult together. Olivia started leaving notes for her on the counter. "Eleanor, there's pie in the fridge. I baked it myself. Try it and tell me honestly if it's edible or should be thrown out." Eleanor would reply on the back of the note in pencil. "It's edible, but you could use less sugar and a little more cinnamon." On Saturdays, Olivia began inviting her for tea, not as an employee, but as a friend. They would sit in the kitchen, drinking tea with cookies, and talk. Eleanor told her about her daughters, one living in the suburbs, the other working up in Alaska. She talked about her grandson, Michael, who was in 3rd grade and drew dinosaurs in the margins of his notebooks. She spoke of her late husband, Victor, who used to fix old radios and had once built a crystal radio set from spare parts that still sat on a shelf in her room. Olivia listened and thought about how strange life was. Her grandmother had left her a condo. The condo had brought Mark into her life, but it had also brought Eleanor. 1 door, 2 keys, 2 stories. One of deception and calculation, the other of honesty and the courage to speak the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. One evening, alone in the quiet condo, Olivia walked over to the photograph in the hallway. The young Evelyn looked out from behind the glass with an expression her grandmother used to call my command-in-chief look. "You know, Grandma," Olivia said softly, "you left me more than just a condo. You left me a place that needed defending. And I defended it, though not on my own." She stroked the frame with her finger, turned off the hall light, and went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. Outside, the maple tree rustled, and if she listened closely, she could almost hear something that sounded like her grandmother's voice in the wind. "A place of your own isn't just walls, Livy. It's where nobody can mess with you." Olivia smiled. poured herself some tea into the mug with the chipped handle, the same one Mark had been drinking from when he proposed, and thought that the mug, perhaps, was due for a replacement. But the condo was not. The condo would remain. Just like Eleanor would remain the woman who had looked at keys for 30 years and, one day, saw something on one of them that saved someone else's home. Thank you for listening to our story. Please share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our channel.